Hello, welcome to On Wildlife. I'm your host, Alex Ray. On this podcast, we bring the wild to you. We take you on a journey into the life of a different animal every week, and I guarantee you're going to come out of here knowing more about your favorite animal than you did before. We're sticking with our ocean theme from last week and heading back into the sea for this episode. And the animal that I'm going to be talking about today is objectively one of the most majestic creatures on Earth. But I'm not alone in this adventure, as I got the chance to sit down with Simon Hillbourne, who works for the Manta Trust. So get ready to catch some waves, because we're going to talk about one of the gentle giants of the ocean, manta rays. Manta rays are animals that can be found in oceans all over the world, and they can live in different areas of the ocean as well, like near the coast or out in the deep ocean. They're also closely related to stingrays and devil rays, and we're going to talk more about their differences later on in the episode. The first appearance of a manta ray ancestor was about 20 million years ago, and manta rays are actually related to sharks as well. And just like some sharks, they need to keep swimming in order to survive. They need the oxygen in the water to be constantly running through their gills. So how do they sleep? Well, it's a trick question because there's evidence to support the fact that manta rays don't sleep at all. Now, manta rays are really cool animals, and there's a lot more to talk about. So after the break, you're going to hear my interview with Simon Hillbourne. The person that I want to recognize in this week's episode of Notable Figures in Science is Shen Kuo, who was a Chinese scientist during the Song Dynasty. One of the things that he's most well known for is the Dream Pool essays, where he wrote about a bunch of different species that hadn't been documented before. While studying these species, he noted the importance of environmentalism, and this was way back around 1000 AD. And this wasn't the only reason that he was ahead of his time. He was one of the first people to talk about using a compass to determine north and south using the Earth's magnetic field. He also described the invention of something like the printing press, which wouldn't have been invented for another 400 years. One of the most intriguing things about him was the fact that he often talked about UFOs. He helped with the advancement of civilization in so many different ways. It's crazy to me that he's not a household name. If you want to learn more about Shen Kuo or this series in general, check out onwildlife.org. Okay, we're back. So Simon is a marine biologist with the Manta Trust, and I wanted to see how he got started with manta rays in the first place.
I learned to scuba dive at quite a young age. I had a slightly unusual sort of upbringing. I lived overseas my whole life, so I learned to scuba dive in Thailand at a young age, and then kind of fell in love with tropical reef systems and the ocean. I went to university in Southampton in the UK, where it was all cold water stuff, and it wasn't really my thing. So I quite soon moved back overseas to study or work with an organization studying whale sharks. And then it sort of transitioned over that I started working with the Manta Trust in the Maldives and kind of been here ever since for the last 5 or 6 years.
That's really cool. And it's something else when you're looking at like coastal tropical waters, like looking at all the bursting sea life under there. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, marine biology is fascinating, and there's so much interesting stuff. And if I wasn't doing tropical marine biology, I'd probably be doing deep sea ecology, because I think that's just so fascinating, so interesting. But I really like to sort of put myself in the field and see what I'm doing and things like that. So yeah, I'm only really going to be doing that in tropical waters, not in cold UK waters, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon also created an initiative called Fish Free February. It's really cool, and I'll let him explain it.
That's a new sort of campaign that I've set up and launched actually as a new NGO here in the UK, a new charity. And the whole sort of idea came from working with Manta Trust and visiting fish markets in Southeast Asia and seeing the sort of number of sharks and rays being landed all the time, and speaking to some of the fishermen, some of that, a lot of that was just all bycatch.
Bycatch is when fishermen catch animals that they're not fishing for, and this could be devastating to a whole population of organisms.
What they were catching was tuna, and speaking to the fishermen, some of that tuna was actually being exported to Europe and America and places like that. So that kind of made me think, okay, hang on a second. I know that now because I've been to these fish markets, but all my friends back in the UK who haven't been to fish markets, they're not going to have any clue that that sort of stuff's going on. It just kind of struck me that there's a lot of conversation these days about sustainability and how we can sort of live more sustainable lifestyles and reduce our meat consumption and things like that. But all of the narrative is around red meat and beef and cattle and destroying rainforests and things like that. And so little talk about the oceans. But with manta rays specifically, the biggest threat to manta rays around the world is from fisheries, either targeted fisheries where the fishermen are specifically going out hunting for manta rays or devil rays, which appears to be on the decline. It's not as common, which is a good thing. But there's also a huge amount of bycatch fisheries. So that's where the fishing fleets are targeting something else, and then the manta rays are accidentally being caught up in the fishing nets or fishing lines, even sometimes with long lines for some mobula species.
That's why it's so important to eat fish sustainably and cut down on our overall seafood consumption. Now, let's talk specifically about manta rays. How do we tell the differences between individuals? Well, Simon's got our answer.
Basically, each and every manta ray is born with a unique spot pattern on their belly, on the sort of the ventral surface of the manta ray. And they're born with that spot pattern. It's a bit dull and faded at birth, but then it sort of becomes more pronounced. And that pattern doesn't change throughout their lifetime. So that's a really easy way for scientists to basically identify these individuals, much like a human fingerprint. And then we know who those individuals are based off of that.
So this is a great opportunity for the average person to help scientists out.
So this works great for our marine researchers around the world because we can go out and take photographs. But we can obviously only be in one place at one time, and we only go out for a 45-minute hour dive or whatever, or a one-day snorkel or something. But if you imagine how many tourists are out there and everyone's got a GoPro these days, everyone's got an underwater camera, you've suddenly got a huge network of people who can start collecting data. So that's what it's really tapping into, what we call citizen science. So now everyone's able to collect this sort of data. All you need to do is get a photo of the underside of the belly, tell us what day it was, what time it was, what dive site it was, because we need to know where in the world it was. And we can run that ID against all the other mantas that we've kind of got in our database and find out whether it's a new manta ray that we've never sighted before, whether it's one that we've seen in that area, maybe it's been there every year, maybe it's come from another region, and now we've got a migratory path or a movement.
That's called the ID the Manta Tracking Initiative, and anyone in the world can participate.
I think it's quite interesting for people as well. I mean, you go out on a dive and you see a shark and a turtle and whatever. You never really know much about that. Whereas if you see a manta ray and you get an ID and you send it to us, and if we have seen it before, we might have quite a neat, interesting backstory that we can tell you about that individual, that we've seen it every year for the last 7-8 years. We saw it pregnant back in 2018, or it had a shark bite and now that's all completely healed and it's moved between all of these different places. It just makes it more sort of relatable to what you've seen and more connected, which I think is really important.
Now, you're probably wondering what the difference is between manta rays and stingrays. There's more differences than you think.
They are all relatively similar. They all fall under the elasmobranch sort of classifications. They are fairly related, but there are major distinctions between manta and devil rays and other stingrays. That the shape of their body, they have more of a diamond-shaped body than kind of a round ring, which a lot of stingrays will have. Stingrays, kind of as the name suggests, and eagle rays and stuff like that have stinging barbs on their tail. Manta rays don't have any barbs on the tail, so it's just the tail, and so they're sort of completely harmless from that point of view. And then they're most closely related to eagle rays and cow nose rays because they all sort of have a similar body shape and sort of function. But eagle rays and cow nose rays, they're much more benthic. They live in they sort of feed in the substrate, looking for crustaceans and mollusks and stuff like that in the sand. Whereas mantas and devil rays, they've evolved to live all pretty much pelagic. So they're swimming around in the water column, feeding on plankton up in the water column rather than down on the seabed.
So they don't have that stinger that you would find in stingrays, meaning that they're pretty harmless.
They are very big animals, though, so you don't really want to sort of get in the way of one and accidentally get hit by the wing, because it's a solid animal.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people, if you see them on TV or on a screen, you don't realize how big these animals actually are.
Yeah, I mean, the big oceanic mantas grow up to sort of 6-7 meters in wingspan. The reef mantas 4.5 in some places. So yeah, these are 2, 3, 4 times the size of a human, if not more. Getting up to the size of like a minivan almost.
Yeah, that's crazy. Even though they're not dangerous to humans, they still have to eat something, and they use structures called gill rakers to catch their prey.
Manta rays have 5 pairs of gill slits, and inside of those there's a gill arch. So 10 sort of structures. And that's where the manta rays can swim around with their mouth wide open. The 2 cephalic fins, the sort of the horns on the head of the animal, they unfurl and they act as a funnel. And they scoop in lots and lots of water into their mouth. And then that passes through the gills, the gill slit. And the gill plate is able to basically redirect and push the small bits of plankton that the manta rays want to feed, or the devil rays want to feed on, into the back of the mouth area, where they can then sort of swallow it. So it's used for feeding. They're filter feeders. They're planktonics filter feeders. So they're swimming around when they're feeding with their mouth wide open for long periods of time, filtering all these tiny plankton planktonic animals, kind of the size of a grain of rice, filtering those all out of the water. And they're also used in respiration as well. So like other sharks and rays and stuff.
That's really a crazy adaptation and really cool. And I think a lot of those huge animals that you find in the ocean are usually the ones that are eating those microscopic plankton.
Yeah, it's odd how that works, isn't it? I mean, you've got the whale sharks and the megamouths, and then even in the whales, like some of the big baleen whales with their filter feeders as well. So it's interesting how it works.
And sometimes you'll see that manta rays look like they're flying out of the water. I wanted to know why this is.
Yeah, it's not entirely understood exactly why it happens. It is fascinating when you see it. It's such a cool spectacle, especially with the manta rays, because they're such huge animals, and to get to a speed where they can propel themselves out of the water is quite a feat. But yeah, they can basically clear themselves completely out of the water and come smashing down. Some of them land on their belly, some land on their backs. And we're not entirely sure why this happens. It happens semi-regularly over cleaning stations where the manta rays are visiting a bit of reef to be picked clean of parasites and things like that. So there's thoughts that there may be breaching to get the itchy parasites and itchy remoras off. So they're trying to dislodge all of those things. It's a possibility. But we also see a lot of breaching just before feeding events, mass feeding events, and things like that. So there's also a potential that it might be some form of communication, possibly also for courtship, maybe to kind of attract a mate or something to do with that. It's quite hard to know at the moment. But then some of the other species of mobulas as well, like the Monk's devil ray in the Sea of Cortez in Baja California in Mexico. They're pretty famous for jumping, and you get these big schools of devil rays and all leaping out of the water kind of at the same time. And these are kind of mini mantas, the little devil rays. And it's super cute. So yeah, really fascinating, but we're not entirely sure why it happens. Still more questions.
Okay, so we know that they're majestic, but are they intelligent?
As far as fish and things go, they're definitely up there with some of the most intelligent species of fish. They have these sort of social behaviors, and they have cooperative feeding behaviors, lots of different feeding strategies, lots of different kind of social mechanisms and stuff like that. We're still in the early days of trying to figure out whether there's hierarchies between populations. In general, manta rays are considered to be solitary animals, so they live alone and they travel between areas by themselves. But we definitely get aggregations and mantas coming back to the same cleaning stations and gathering in large groups when they're feeding. And then they sort of start to break off into, like I was saying, cooperative feeding. So we get chain feeding where they're all feeding in a line, one behind each other, up and down, and they'll follow a current path. Or they spiral off into cyclone feeding. So it's kind of working cooperatively to make the most of the available food, which is quite a sort of complex behavior. And again, we're talking about fish here, not mammals. So it's not dolphins and whales and things like that. They're slightly less developed. But as far as fish go, they have one of the largest brain to body size ratios in the world. So of any species of fish. So that also goes to suggest that, they might have a fair amount of brain capacity.
Just the fact that they're able to work together so well is a testament to how smart they are.
You kind of get that vibe as well when you're in the water with them. There's definitely something going on between those eyes. The manta ray will sort of check you out and swim around you and definitely sort of know that you're there and that there's sort of something going on, and they're inquisitive. So it's super interesting from that side of things as well.
Obviously, these huge animals that eat a lot of food are going to be extremely important to the ecosystems that they live in. Here's Simon for more on that.
Yeah, so they play quite an interesting role. They often feed in different areas and then return, so sort of offshore areas off from the reef in deeper waters and in channels and things like that, a bit further off the reef. And then they return back to the shallow cleaning reefs, and that's where they spend their time cleaning. And they basically feed in one area and come back and then can poo in another area. And that's basically nutrient transfer from one ecosystem to another. And one of our affiliate projects down in the Seychelles found that these manta rays were sort of filling this ecological niche that no other species was really doing on the coral reefs, of transporting nutrients back from habitats off the reef back into the sort of shallow coastal reefs, which is quite interesting. And then obviously from a human perspective, there's huge tourism around these animals. They are such elegant, beautiful animals that people really want to spend a lot of time in the water with and will pay money to go and see, essentially. So having them alive and having sort of healthy populations is important for local communities that rely on tourism.
So they're important to the ecosystems and to the local economy. Unfortunately, they're struggling right now. Simon told me how the average person can help manta rays.
I think 7 of the 10 or 11 species of manta and devil ray, they're now listed as endangered, and all the rest are either vulnerable or we just don't have enough information about. So they're definitely moving in the wrong direction towards the sort of extinct end of the spectrum, which is bad news. But they're also really important for conservation because they're kind of an iconic species that people can really fall in love with. So you can really connect people to the ocean environment and the marine ecosystems through manta rays, people who maybe wouldn't be as interested otherwise. So it's kind of like that gateway animal that you can kind of get them hooked on marine conservation and saving the oceans because of this beautiful iconic species. And then through that, you can kind of hopefully get them to protect the wider ecosystem and all the other fish and animals and coral and plants that live in the ecosystem as well. As far as things go for things that people can do, reducing the amount of seafood that we eat, moving towards a more plant-based diet if possible. Just kind of reduce in general and then choose sustainable options where possible. In terms of other things that people can do, learn about manta rays. They're fascinating animals. There's lots of cool stuff, and share that knowledge with other people, tell other people about them. A lot of people don't really know what a manta ray is or the fact that they're endangered or sort of how majestic they are. And you can also obviously submit ID photos if you're on holiday anywhere around the world and you do come across mantas. Like we mentioned, you can kind of support manta conservation that way. And similarly, if you're doing any ecotourism, try to look for an operator that has code of conduct and follows some sort of guidelines with manta interactions, because you don't want to be getting too close to them or riding the manta rays or disturbing them in any way. So we want to try and follow sustainable code of conducts. And then lastly, obviously, a lot of these marine conservation organizations are non-profits, charities. So we rely on public donations and things like that in order for us to continue our work. So donations and things like that to marine conservation charities goes a long way and is always well received.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up a lot of great points, and there's so much that we can do to help. And when you're helping manta rays, you're helping ecosystems, entire ecosystems. And some of the stuff that you mentioned just helps all wildlife and
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
entire earth, which is amazing. So where can we find more information about the Manta Trust?
Yeah, so we're on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and then our website is www.mantatrust.org. There's loads of great resources on our website, educational stuff about manta rays and their threats and their ecology and things like that. We've also got a large education section with kids clubs activities and things like that. So if anyone has young children and looking for activities to do and want them to be marine themed, we've got lots of games and stuff on there, which is great. And you'll find all the other information about how to support us on there as well. If you want to adopt a manta ray or anything like that, that can all be found on our website as well.
That's really great. Everybody should definitely go check that out. Simon, thank you so much for coming on again. I learned so much, and I think everybody's really going to enjoy hearing about manta rays.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alex. It was a pleasure.
I really loved hearing about all of Simon's experiences and the projects that he's working on to help manta rays thrive. And luckily, we can do a lot to help them too by supporting organizations like the Manta Trust. You should also check out two other organizations that are helping manta rays in the wild right now. There's Manta Pacific Research Foundation and the Manta Caribbean Project. Thank you so much for coming on this adventure with me as we explored the world of manta rays. You can find the sources that we used for this podcast and links to organizations that we referenced at onwildlife.org. You can also email us with any questions at onwildlife.podcast@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Instagram at on_wildlife and on TikTok at onwildlife. Don't forget to tune in next Wednesday for another awesome episode. And that's On Wildlife.
You've been listening to On Wildlife with Alex Ray. On Wildlife provides general educational information on various topics as a public service, which should not be construed as professional, financial, real estate, tax, or legal advice. These are our personal opinions only. Please refer to our full disclaimer policy on our website for full details.